Good evening and welcome to Undercover. This is a show that looks between the covers of books by Missoula area authors. My name is Dave Pauley. I'm the host of the show and also the director of the Missoula Public Library. And this show is jointly produced by the Missoula Public Library and Fact and Fiction Bookstore. And before we get into the show tonight, I just want to take a minute to again thank Barbara Thoreau of Fact and Fiction, who is sort of the co-producer, finds all the talent for us to bring on our show. And our guest tonight is Chris Roberts. Welcome, Chris.
How you doing?
Good. Chris is the author of a new book called Powwow Country. If we get a shot here of the colors, you can see what beautiful colors we have just on the cover, and plenty of gorgeous photographs on the inside. I want to ask you, first of all, Chris, how you came to write and produce this book. It's more than just writing. You took all the photographs yourself?
Yeah, I did. I guess I tell a story in the introduction of how several years ago, more like 22, 23 years ago, when I was first starting getting involved in dancing on the powwow circuit, that I went looking for a book that would tell me what a powwow was, what went on at them, what dancers do, what outfits they wear, and things like that. And other than certain selected craft magazines, there really wasn't a book like that. And I thought, it would be good to have a book like that. During the course of learning how to dance and making outfits myself and changing from 3 or 4 different styles of outfits, I would make pictures with a simple 110 camera, little snapshots. And a lot of the people I would see on the circuit over the 25 years were personal friends of mine, so I would make snapshots. And this was not with a 35 millimeter camera, but just a simple 110. And they date back to about 1968. And they were primarily for what I would call research purposes. I'd look at them and take notes, and then I'd photograph various sections of a dancer's body. And that led into also photographing my friends and just making, your typical on-a-trip snapshots. Well, I always had an interest in photography, and finally in early 1980s, I got my first 35 millimeter camera. And I was interested in working with creative people. I'd worked with musicians, I'd worked with illustrators, I'd even worked with some photographers. And I went to a National Professional Photographers Conference in New York City. First time I ever go to New York City, I go to this 3-4 day conference. And I was really trying to study on how to market photography or how to market photographers. And one of the things that came across in the seminars I went to, that if you're going to make it as a photographer, you need to have some sort of specialty. And so I thought, I've been photographing on the powwow circuit for a long time, and even though I'm photographing scenics, and I had photographed about 5 weeks in Europe, and tripod work and laying everything out and trying to make pretty natural pictures, more tourist pictures, I guess, I started thinking, I have great access to the outfits, and maybe this is how the book could come together. I had gone earlier, late 70s, I had written articles for craft magazines, and they had taken my 110 snapshots and blown them up, and they were pretty grainy and not very well composed. But I had written an article called The Northern Style Fancy Dancer for a magazine called American Indian Crafts and Culture, and I'd written a couple other articles that were craft-oriented. And I thought, now's the time maybe to try and put a book together. So about 1984, 85, I went out with a 35 millimeter, and I started saying to my friends, I think I'd like to put a book together and tell the powwow story. At the same time, I was receiving real strong encouragement from the Indian people on the circuit. They said, nobody ever covers the powwow. We never see pictures of Indians. If they tell a picture of an Indian, they'll show a picture of an Indian that was in 1905 or 1915. Most historians, anthropologists, or people that study our culture figure we died out about the turn of the century. And they said, why don't they ever show the contemporary things? And so I said, well, I'll give it a shot. I'll try. And I started telling people that I was going to work on a book. And so I concentrated on the photography. I started writing some articles to get my photography out for Peterson's Photographic. I wrote an article on the powwow for Native Peoples Magazine, an article on Rocky Boy, Northwest Living, Northwest, and I started putting out magazine articles that were powwow related. And I approached one bookstore, book publisher, and that was Montana Magazine, and I said to them, would you be interested in doing the book? This is about 5 years ago. And they said, oh, we've got too many projects, and we don't think a book on Indians will sell anyway. And I said, oh, okay. And then I approached a couple other Montana publishers, and no, they weren't interested. Then I approached, a number of East Coast publishers. And finally, one of the publishers came back, and out of England, actually, and said, we want to do a book. We'll give you a flat fee, and you do the book, and then it's all ours. And I said, wait a minute, I don't want to do the flat fee thing. And so I went back to Montana Magazine. They still were too busy. And then I went to another publisher in Helena who took on the project for about a year, but we didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things, and they dropped the project after about a year. And then I said, well, your competitors in Helena have dropped the project, Montana Magazine, are you interested? And it was from about a period from January to June, they weren't sure. And then June of last year, they said, let's go ahead. And it kind of rolled along till then.
So it's been a long time in the making, and it's taken some persistence, I guess.
Yeah, it's taken some persistence. It's taken a lot of rejections.
Yeah.
I went through the whole thing of writing a book query or a book proposal to a lot of different publishers. This still isn't the book that I still see in my head. I think it could be, I think you could say it's a good solid section of a book that I see in my head. I see the women of powwow country, the men of powwow country, the portraits and different isolated families or special events that are covered. Most of the criticism I have is that, boy, it's very limited in it's very general in its view, but very limited in the people that are in it. And because the powwow is such a national, actually, I was talking today to somebody in Wisconsin, the powwow is really a continental phenomenon.
Including Canada
and the United States. I don't know if it gets down into Central America, but I'm sure there's something like that, a celebration. And if you there are powwows in New York, you can go down all the way down the East Coast, you can follow every single state, including Hawaii, have Indian powwows. I met a gentleman from Vancouver, BC, who was part Squamish and part Hawaiian, who says there are 5,000 Indians in Hawaii, and they will put on a powwow.
In fact, you have an appendix that has a list of powwows
Some
all over
powwows.
the country. Yeah.
They were selectively chosen either because they were well-known, popular powwows, or because I wanted to cover a certain section of the country and get everybody a fair share. But I get a bi-monthly news magazine, and in their section, just in the Midwest area alone, there's 20 to 30 powwows in a 2-month period. That didn't used to be in the 1960s.
Right. I was going to ask you about that a little later, because you did write about the resurgence of the whole idea. But I think maybe we ought to try to define exactly what we're talking about when we use the term powwow, because you wrote in there that a lot of people don't really understand or think maybe it's just dancing but what is a powwow exactly?
I think the best way to explain what a powwow is to say it's a giant family reunion, complete with dancing, crafts tables, food concessions, softball tournaments, runs, rodeos, parades, horse racing, people racing, just about teen dance halls. It's a big event where people from that particular tribe host an event that they call it an Indian celebration. Come to our home reservation, celebrate with us that you're Indian, that you're proud of being Indian, and that this is our folk, our culture. And they play host, and then people from maybe 400 or 500 miles away, maybe if there are people from that particular tribe that are coming home, may come up thousands of miles just to attend that celebration.
And you also said that this phenomenon has been in a state of resurgence since the 60s, that it was actually the whole celebration was kind of dying out prior to that. Why is that?
Well, in the between, let's say, 1900 and 1930, the government really frowned upon Indian people being Indian. They said you must blend and become part of the melting pot. And so they discouraged Indian languages, Indian culture, Indian traditions, Indian religions. And so the powwow kind of went underground with a lot of other things. Then in the late 1940s, there was the John Collier administration in the late 30s, and they finally said, well, they encouraged Indian identification again, and that was a change of view. So the powwow started coming about. In the 1950s, there, in the Oklahoma area, started having a real resurgence. And so Oklahoma was considered the center of Indian country. And even today, because there are two different circuits of the powwow, there is a rivalry.
There's a northern and a southern?
Southern circuit, and it's just like the northern and southern United States or northern and southern Italy. They take digs at each other and like to say, we're better than you are, or whatever. And the northern powwows are a little bit more looser, less tradition-bound, less regimented, and the southern circuit is a little bit more so, very, very refined, very meticulous sometimes with even their outfits, and you can see those differences. The northern circuit's more relaxed, the southern circuit is more tradition-bound, because that's probably where the powwow is centered. But not so much anymore, and so this powwow book really covers more of the northern circuit.
Right. In fact, Montana seems to be a center for a lot of the activity.
Northern South Dakota, Montana, Alberta are pretty much the center of powwow country in the north. It's where fads and different costume styles will generate out of. And though each area has a region, you can say that there are regional area powwow centers. But if you break the two circuits down, yeah, Montana is. So when we say powwow country, we can really be referring to Montana as powwow country.
Sure.
Another thing I've noticed is that in the southern areas, the state's tourism bureaus will look at the powwows as a real draw attraction for tourists. I just saw recently in Time magazine a full-page spread for Texas, and it says, come to where the natives are, and there's this picture of Indians. And Oklahoma has pushed it for years, has pushed, you know, this is Indian country, come to Indian country.
We haven't done that so much?
Montana hasn't done anything. Just now, in the last 2 or 3 years, you see an Indian country section in our travel guides. But it used to be that you'd get one little 2-inch by 2-inch picture of, say, Crow Fair is taking place, and a picture of one person in a... Montana, I think, has a real cultural richness in which they could use, and I think the tribes could use themselves to attract out-of-town dollars and to poverty-depressed areas. I think we saw Glacier Country was one of the 14 in the bottom of the United States, our Glacier County, and I think the Indian people can use their culture. The part of it that is a social culture, there's also religious culture, and I don't think that should be exploited or overused. But I think social culture and the fact that the powwow, the part of the powwow spirit is everybody's welcome. That has to be there, or it's not a good powwow.
And you wrote about that in here. You said that people, even observers who are not Indians, are welcome, and you shouldn't feel like you're going to be excluded.
No, and that's very true. And here in Montana, and especially in western Montana, we had a powwow 30 miles north of us that in the early 60s was an excuse to sell a lot of alcohol. And I think it was the non-Indians seeing a benefit there and saying, well, we'll sell alcohol. So the Arlee powwow had a reputation. They actually had a beer garden on the grounds, and it had a reputation of being a real party zone. 4th of July, non-Indians in western Montana would steer clear of Arlee. 15 years ago, the tribe said, no more. We're not going to do this. We're going to have this be a really special event. And they restricted no alcohol, no drugs, and they've now really gone out of their way to encourage non-Indian people to come to it. But in putting on a powwow here in Missoula 4 or 5 years ago, we still encountered that stereotyping that it was a drunken party.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if we could talk a little about some of the specific activities, and specifically the dancing, because you have so many wonderful photographs of people in native costume, and you talk a lot about the different kinds of dancing. I wonder if you could just define the types of dancing that you'll find in a
Well,
typical
first
powwow.
you break it down, there's male and female categories. And then within those categories there are age breakdowns, so you can have children, teens, and adults and seniors. There's a section for those. So you've got that broken down in both male and female. Then after that, there are costume and dance style categories, which break it down again. And they're primarily three in each age and gender style. There's what is called fancy dance, which is very acrobatic, free form and flowing, extremely colorful, and is kind of the trend setting, or the, if we're going to do something new and different, this is where it will focus. So it will focus on fancy dance. And some of the dancers will have taken ballet or gymnastics in order to be better at their styles, and a lot of them train. So there's men and women's fancy dance. In women it's called fancy shawl dance, and men it's called feathers dance or fancy dance. Then there is, in each category of male, female, there's what is called traditional dancing. And traditional dancing is a more refined, based on culture and tradition in the past. So it's a contemporary traditional, in that elements will have been borrowed from past, whether it's the tribal culture or just plains culture, and will be incorporated into that dance and costume style. And the dancers, for instance, men will focus more on trying to tell a story, whether they're hunting or whether they're going after on a war party or something. And even though they're not really doing that, there are some moves in there that are definitely designed to give you that feeling. The women's traditional is very heavy in beadwork and buckskin dresses, very graceful, very, it's not sedate in that it's boring to watch, but it's more like, lends a very air of very high dignity and honor. And then there's other categories in both male and female division. One new category that's coming on is called jingle dress. And that's where a dress of cloth has tin cones made out of Copenhagen can lids. And the idea there is to dance a certain style and hear those jingles making a certain noise. And there's a certain element of footwork there and a certain element of holding your body that the jingle dress dancers will do in the female end. And the men have a style called grass dance. And grass dance has its roots in some of the traditional ways and some of the modern ways, but the biggest differentiation of a grass dancer is that they don't wear the feather bustles that fancy dancers and traditional dancers wear, but they wear outfits that have a yarn fringe all over them and bright colors and lots of beadwork. And it's a very strenuous style of body movements, contorting your way out of shape almost.
Yeah. Another part of a powwow that you described, several different parts, but one that you had some reference to was a giveaway. Could you explain what that is exactly?
Well, it was always, for Indian people, it's not so much getting, it's giving away. And so they've always been known for generosity, even when the white man first came. They gave meals and things. And so that's a tradition that carries on, is to give away in honor of somebody or something. So if there's a special event that the tribe or a family is commemorating, then they'll hold a giveaway. And it won't be once a year. It might be 5 years. They might collect and save things up for 3 or 4 years. So if somebody dies, they want to honor that person. Maybe somebody graduates from college, somebody comes back from the military, somebody wins a scholarship, somebody's an Indian princess. Those are all reasons to hold a giveaway, or a family to hold a giveaway. And the entire extended family will take part in that, and they will gather up goods, beadwork, horses, teepees. I've seen all those given away, money, blankets, cloth, food, and sometimes 2 or 3 pickup truck loads will back into the dance arbor, unload all these things, and then this will be given away by the family to friends and relatives.
I guess since we have with us someone who's somewhat of an authority on Native American culture, I kind of wondered if you would talk a little bit about what you think the future of Native Americans in this country is, where you see that going. Obviously, this kind of thing is a resurgence of pride in your own culture, but there's also numerous problems that you've alluded to on reservations. And where do you think the future lies for Native Americans now?
I think there's going to be a growth period for Native Americans. They're one of the largest growing minorities in the United States. Their people are realizing that education is an answer to a lot of the economic problems. So you get tribal members going away to business school, getting degrees, getting law degrees, and coming back and helping the tribe. And I think that's very beneficial. The problem is that a lot of the reservation lands are not very productive. There's not any resources there. So what kind of businesses do you build? And that's a problem I think a lot of the tribes are faced with. I think we're going to see more interest in language. I think we're going to see more people starting to pass on their culture to their children and learning their culture themselves. And I think that Indian people are going to grow. We're not going to, the vanishing Indian is a myth. And I think Indian people are going to develop. It's going to be a slow haul, and they're going to meet resistance all the way, because non-Indian people are accustomed now to having an Indian person as a ward of the government, and they're not used to dealing with Indian people one-on-one in business. That's why we see the problems we see up on the Flathead Reservation.
Well, when you were putting the book together, did you feel you were doing it somewhat in response, not only in response to requests from Indian people about we need a book about this subject, but to non-Indian people to explain?
The whole focus of the book is to say, wake up, smell the coffee, or smell the fry bread. That would be a more appropriate way of saying it. Because Indian people are going to be here, they're going to be strong, they're going to make their way in the world, and it will always be part of the United States that we will have this indigenous people that we will be proud of.
And what about, you mentioned a little bit about the response of the book. I wonder about marketing it and selling it. Are you involved in that at all, or is that left up to the publisher, or how does that work?
Well, yeah, I am involved in it. The reason I wanted to go with a Montana publisher is because I wanted to have a hand in marketing the book. I felt that most of the publishers out there know the book trade business, and they can sell the book in what they call the trade market. But I didn't feel that most of the publishers knew what is called the Indian market. In the Indian market, there are people that are interested in Indians, Indian people themselves, or people that have to be interested in Indians. And so I felt I could help the publisher. And so we struck a deal where I'm also a distributor and handle a fair amount of my own marketing.
Oh, okay.
And I have, right now, I've just had my first sales statements comes in, and it looks to me like about of the number of books sold, the publisher has done 1/3, the major national distributor has done 1/3, and I've done 1/3.
So it's good that you're in on the process.
Right.
Yeah.
I think there would be 33% of the market that wouldn't be there. And I haven't had any bookstores to go to. My market has been libraries, schools, Indian traders, teachers, and booksellers on the powwow circuit.
Okay. Name of the book again is Powwow Country, and our author today is Chris Roberts. Thanks a lot for being here, Chris.
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it. Anyone who wants to get a look at this book, we have a couple copies at the Missoula Public Library, and also I'm sure it's available in local bookstores. Great. Thanks for being here. I want to take a few minutes at the end here just to do my usual spiel about the library. Again, we're open 6 days a week, 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Thursday, 10 to 6 on Friday and Saturday. Also want to remind everyone who's watching that National Library Week is coming up in April 18th through the 24th. The theme this year is Libraries Change Lives, and we'll be having some special events during National Library Week to commemorate the importance of libraries in our lives. So keep watching the newspaper for announcements about that. Remind everybody about some of the programs we have regularly scheduled at the library: Adult Book Discussion Group, which meets the third Thursday of every month at 7 o'clock. We still have some slots open for that if anybody's interested in getting in on the book discussion. We have some lively discussions of mostly contemporary novels. So call me or talk to Betty or Christine at the library about book discussion. Our number is 721-BOOK, 721-2665. And in the short time I have remaining, sometimes people, I think, get a little frustrated with public institutions and want to know how they can have a say in what happens there. Well, there's a couple ways you can have a say in what happens to the library. First of all, you can just come right in and talk to me personally. I'll be glad to talk to anybody who has an opinion or idea about how we can do better. We also have these little blue forms that you'll find spread around the library. And if you're a little bit shy or you have something you want to put in writing, that's what these are for. I try to write a response to every one of these that we get, and I post it on our bulletin board. And it's just a way for you to complain. It's also a way for you to give us a compliment if you so desire, and we're happy to take those also. And as I said, I do try to write a response to those and let people know, explain some of our policies. We've had some good suggestions from these that we've actually implemented put into practice, so you're welcome to fill out one of these. The other way you can participate is by picking up a copy of this long-range plan at the library. It's a 5-year plan for service. I really feel like it's a living document that's going to be revised as years go along, obviously, and we want feedback from the public on this. You know, we're interested in what you think. We're always interested in what people think about how we're doing, how can we do it better, what sort of services would you like to have at the library. And if you're dissatisfied with anything, we don't see that as a problem at all. We welcome the chance to respond to any complaints or questions, observations that you might have, and we've had some very interesting ones come in. So, again, our number is 721-BOOK. If you need to call us about any programs going on, I forgot to mention our preschool story hour, but that's 3 times a week. We have a morning, an afternoon, and evening session. That'll be going clear through the month of April, so if you need information about times and anything else about preschool story hour, please call us. We'll be glad to answer that. Again, I want to thank Chris Roberts. And again, the name of the book is Powwow Country. Not only some excellent information about Native American peoples and culture, but also some wonderful photographs, all taken by the author. Chris, I want to thank you again for being our guest.
Yep.
Good evening. Welcome to Undercover. This is the show that looks between the covers of books by Missoula area authors. My name is Dave Pauley. I'm director of the Missoula Public Library and also the host of this show. And our show is jointly produced by the Missoula Public Library and Fact and Fiction Bookstore. And I also want to give an acknowledgement to the folks at MCAT, where we do all the filming of the show. Our guest for tonight's show is John Jackson. Welcome. Nice to have you here.
Well, it's good to be here.
And John is the author of a new book called Hid on the House. And John, I must admit that as a librarian, I see people who have voracious appetites for detective and mystery stories, but I don't read a lot of them myself. And I guess when I read this, I thought it was more of a police procedural type than the traditional murder mystery. Am I correct in that perception?
Yeah, that's sort of a subgenre in the field. I would say probably the most popular form is the private eye novel, but I've never been particularly interested in that kind of.
In fact, your protagonist is a police detective.
He's a police detective in Detroit.
Right.
I'm trying presently to move him out to Montana, but I don't know how successfully that's going to work out. I'm sort of two minds. Right now, I'm about halfway through the book, and I have him in Montana, but whether he'll actually stay, I don't know.
Be quite a culture shock for him, won't it?
I think it is. So far, it has been a culture shock for him. Watching him kind of react to the wide open spaces after living in a city that's sort of like Beirut these days, it's a little bit different.
So what we're talking about is a book in progress.
Yeah, this is the book in progress.
Right, okay.
It's a book that I'm presently calling Dead Man, but I don't know. I might call it Roadkill, too. I haven't quite made up my mind.
That's a good name for Montana.
Yeah.
Well, when I read it, I wondered how you came by the knowledge you have of what happens in a police precinct station, because those scenes seem to me to be quite vivid and real.
Well, you know, I have to thank my brother Larry, who's a detective on the Missoula County Sheriff's Department, and he has been for many years now. But he and I used to share an apartment together in Detroit. We both grew up in Detroit, essentially. And he was on the police force in Detroit. Plus, I have myself seen the inside of a few precincts in Detroit in my checkered past. But anyway, I feel I have good access to the kind of information that I need to give a realistic sort of interpretation of police life and what goes on in a precinct house.
In fact, one of the early scenes was where one of the killers is incarcerated and then through mistaken identity manages to get out. It seemed like the police were doing their very best to deal with all these people they'd rounded up, but it was really difficult to do so, keep track of them all.
Yeah, in this particular case, the information came directly from my brother, who he still has good contacts in Detroit himself. And the problem was, here we have a murder suspect, or potentially, I guess, from the police point of view, simply a witness, who had been swept up in the aftermath of a killing. And he's brought to the precinct house, and the precinct is already somewhat crowded. The holding pen is somewhat crowded. And I had asked my brother Larry if he could, give me any information on how this guy could actually get out of there without being exposed. He has false identification and so forth, which will stand up to a sort of preliminary scrutiny, but any serious investigation would kind of blow his cover. And I wanted this guy to get out of the jail. So Larry had remembered some circumstances fairly similar to this. One of the problems that they have in a big city, these aren't jails, these are simply holding areas on the precinct level, is occasionally they get overcrowded and people walk because they just can't quite keep track of everybody. As a consequence, they've devised the kind of bracelet system
Yeah,
that
in fact,
hospitals.
you mentioned that in the
Yeah.
book that someone said we should go to that system
Yeah.
here. It would,
And in fact, it's pretty widespread now, and I think Detroit has it now too. But I felt that I could still use a technique by which he manages to pretend that he's somebody else, and he gets taken downtown to be arraigned on a minor charge of, say, drunkenness or something like that. And he simply pays the fine and he walks free.
yeah.
So it was a nice little technique because it gives the reader a sense that, well, it's a naturalistic technique, novel writing,
Right.
to make the reader feel that what they're reading is accurate and true, and so they begin to believe the author. You know?
Right. Yeah, I thought it was quite believable. I do want to talk about believability, though, because this first killer that we meet at the beginning of the book is basically a hitman, a hired hitman. And I want to know, are there really people like that? Am I just very naive to think that's mostly a fictional or invention for the movies or books, or are there people that do that for a living?
Well, there are. It is a literary convention. It's a convention of the genre,
Right.
that you have presumably a whole class of people that can be construed as professional killers who are available for hire. And we know from the trials of various mafia figures and so forth that there are, in fact, a fairly significant number of people. Apparently they don't have any trouble recruiting new ones either. I think they probably have a relatively short half-life, these people. But the way they're portrayed in books and in films, I think, is somewhat fanciful. It's difficult to know exactly what the life of a
Yeah,
genuine
how could you, I
hit
guess?
person would be. I also have, I'm trying to integrate this business, with female hitters. In fact, Richard Condon, in Pritzi's honor, has a female hit person, as it were, and she's very successful, presumably. But it is true that this is a kind of convention. In this particular novel, I made the hitman a guy who is actually a lawyer in Iowa City, and he has very good contacts. He's sort of buddy-buddy with the Iowa City police.
He works with the cops hand
Yeah.
in hand. Yeah.
And so he's able to kind of keep an eye out on any possibility of anybody getting close to him. And this has served to protect him, I guess you could say, over the years. But when in this novel, when the mafia detective, Joe Service, gets on his trail, Joe Service, in his eyes, he finds that this killer, Hal, is rather sloppy, not a good killer in his view. And he's able to track the guy down.
Yeah, and I was wondering about the Iowa City connection. Did you put him in Iowa City just sort of the contrast between the normal all-American town, and here is this guy who kills people for a living right in the
Yeah.
middle of it?
That's exactly it. It really is. I did live in Iowa City for
It's
a
a
significant
beautiful
period
little
of time.
place.
Yeah, it's almost an ideal little Midwestern city
Yeah.
with front porches and swings and pleasant summer weather, and it's a beautiful little town. It has a very good creative writing school there too.
Right.
But while I was living there, in fact, I was working on my first mystery novel, and there was a guy living across the street from me who I thought would be a good candidate for a hitman. I thought, this guy, how secure can you get? You're just a small-town lawyer, and who would ever guess that this quiet, unassuming, hail fellow well met type was actually a hired killer. But I suppose it could be anybody. Hired killers aren't necessarily brutal, mean-looking thugs who hang out in New York. I mean, they come from all over the world, I'm sure. But,
Yeah. Well,
it makes a good contrast.
yeah, I thought it did. I really, having lived in Iowa for a little while.
Oh, did you?
It occurred to me that
Yeah.
the kind of city you see there is quite a contrast.
It's really, it's just like all America
Yeah.
or something. It's what Ronald Reagan thought we all really aspired to,
Right.
was that world, you see.
Yeah. Well, organized crime certainly is a big part of what happens in this particular novel, and I ask you about the hitman, whether that's a convention of the literature, the popular. But I also want to ask you about organized crime. The same question: is that as pervasive as we might be led to believe by popular culture, or not?
Well, I think it is, but my feeling is that it's in decline. I think that the mafia is probably in decline. Essentially, it seems to me that their organization has been destroyed by the drug trade. Evidently, in the early days of drug trade, heroin and so forth, they were heavily involved, and I'm sure still are. But the explosion of the cocaine trade really sidetracked them. I think, if I understand it correctly, the powers that be in the national crime syndicate felt that they should be very careful about getting into the cocaine trade. They saw real dangers there, that large amounts of federal money would be spent and so forth to break it up. And so they evidently left it to the South Americans, the Colombians and others, to run this trade for a while, and I think they've taken over. But I never felt that the mafia was the all-powerful kind of organization that it tended to be portrayed as, particularly in films, where they know everything, they always track these people down and kill them and so forth. I had a lot of experience with mafia people growing up in Detroit. I mean, everybody who lives in Detroit knows something about mafia people. They're your neighbors. They involve themselves in all kinds of business and trades, from jukeboxes to collecting laundry and stuff like that. So you get to know these people, and by and large, they never struck me as very intelligent or very well organized. They weren't very competent, in other words. And I could see the reason for this. The very essence of the business is trust. They have to have somebody they can trust. And there really isn't anyone they can trust except their blood relatives. And if you're in a business where you have to hire all your blood relatives, undoubtedly your business is going to go to hell. You just cannot operate a business that way. You've got to hire, Cousin Joey, who everybody knows can hardly hold a pencil in his hand, much less spell with it. So I think that given their ruthlessness, their ability to really enforce what they want to do, there's no reason why they couldn't have controlled the world, as far as I can see. But the fact that they haven't is evidence of the real flaw in their corporate structure, as you might say.
Yeah. What I wanted to ask you about your protagonist, Detective Mulhausen. Am I pronouncing it?
Mulhausen, yeah.
He's appeared in previous novels.
He's appeared in all four of these
all
novels.
of them. Okay.
Yeah.
And we're going to expect, I guess, to see more of him after what you said.
Yeah, he's in fact, he's in the next two for sure.
Okay. Is he based on anybody in particular that you have known, or is he a composite of people you've known at all? Or?
Well, I think like most literary characters, he's based on a composite of several. There's probably one principal person that it was a man I knew when I was in the service who really impressed me with his integrity and his intelligence and his character, if you will. And when I set out to create a police detective, I didn't know any police detectives. My brother was not on a detective level at that time. He was a patrolman. But I thought that this guy, Mulhausen, as I called him, would be a very good character. Then I integrated other things into his character. And before you ask, no, he's nothing like me. Nothing at all. I think it's a general tendency in readers to read the author into a principal character. And I'm sure that I share with Mulhausen a lot of philosophy and so forth, but from a personality point of view, I think we're quite different.
Well, you have him, you describe him, it's not a major part of the book, but he is struggling a bit within the bureaucracy he works in. He doesn't want to take a test to get promoted because he thinks it'll take him away from the work he really likes to do, and he finds a lot of the people he works with pretty incompetent.
Well, you know, I think that also is a convention of the genre. The detective has to be somewhat at odds with his milieu. He has to be a little bit unusual. He has to stand out from it. And of course, it's true of any large organization that there will be a large number of incompetent people, as in the mafia, as in the police, as in General Motors, IBM, surely. And so if there's one person who actually can do something, that person not only is somewhat at odds with his fellow workers, he's a critic of the organization, generally speaking. And so it's natural that the hero of, say, a crime novel would be somewhat at odds with the milieu in which he operates.
Well, I guess maybe I want to ask you a little bit about your evolution as a writer, how you got started with the whole process, and how you came to be a writer of these kinds of novels.
Well, I think I probably started out like many other writers. I didn't know that I was going to be a writer, but I was a voracious reader. And in my early days, I lived in a very small town in northern Michigan, about 250 miles north of Detroit, up until about the 5th or 6th grade when we moved back to Detroit, where I'd been born. And in this little town, they had a little library that probably, I have no idea how many volumes was in this library, maybe 2,000, something like that. It was only open on Saturdays, and it was staffed by very nice, pleasant, gray or blue-haired ladies who weren't professional librarians, but they sort of took care of it. And it didn't take me very long to read all the books that they would allow me to check out. They wouldn't let me check out Forever Amber or anything like that. But at any rate, I began to perceive that I would soon run out of books and that I was devouring books at a very high rate. And I began to feel a kind of maybe an inchoate responsibility to replace these books, you see. And so that's probably when I first got the idea that I should be a writer. It's sort of one's responsibility to give back something that's been, enjoyment for you. But I didn't know how to write. I didn't know how to write at all. And I made some preliminary stabs at it in my teens, I guess. They weren't very successful at short stories, things like that. So when I started to college at Wayne State University in Detroit, I took a couple of writing courses, and they were interesting to me, but they weren't very informative in ways. That I don't know if it was the kind of course it was, or just maybe it was the professor. I don't know. At any rate, it wasn't until I went back up to northern Michigan and I happened to meet Jim Harrison that I began to get a very strong idea of what it was like to actually be a writer. And Jim encouraged me mainly to write poetry. Subsequently, I came out here to Montana to become a wildlife biologist.
Oh, I see. Like most people who come
Yeah.
for that. Yeah.
And once I got here and I was in the wildlife biology program, which I liked very much, I also was attracted to the English department where there were a lot of very strong writers. Richard Hugo, for sure, but also there was a kind of a cadre of younger writers, people like Jim Crumley and Rick DeMarinis, and particularly Jim Welch. And James Lee Burke was also here. And gosh, there was just an awful lot of writers. And I got where I was spending a lot of time over in the English department. Subsequently, although I went ahead and got my degree, when I was thinking about going to graduate school, Bill Kittredge encouraged me to go to Iowa. Also, Earl Gans did. And so I went to Iowa and got an MFA there. And while I was there, the focus of my writing changed from the short story to the novel. That's what I was really interested in. I'm not particularly interested in the short story. I like to read them, but as a writer, I'm not very interested in writing them. I never have been able to figure out just what a short story is. I used to ask Ray Carver, was one of the finest short story writers of our generation, just what the heck is a short story? And he helped me write a couple of short stories, and in fact, helped to publish one. But I still couldn't figure out just what it was all about. To me, the short story was really more of a tale. I wanted a longer, more expansive kind of venue, I guess. At Iowa, well, I guess at any creative writing school, the emphasis is necessarily on poetry and the short story, because that's what you can deal with in class.
Right.
Class time is fairly precious. You have a number of people that you have to get their stuff on and so forth. The novel can't really be dealt with very well in the university creative writing system, I don't think. I've tried to do it as a teacher myself, and it's just not very successful. However, I did meet there David Morrell, who was not in the writer's workshop at Iowa. He was in the English department. He was a fairly well-known scholar in American literature of the 20th century, particularly Hemingway and some of the tough guy writers like James M. Cain and others. And he had written a very successful novel called First Blood, which was the Rambo story. And of course he was despised in the English department for having the temerity to write a successful and quite frankly conventional sort of thriller. But he had good ideas about writing in the genres. And he encouraged me, in fact, because I told him, I said, I've been here for 2 years and I'm getting my MFA and so forth, but I certainly haven't learned anything about writing the novel. And he said, well, you should try one of the genres. Do you have any interest in, say, mystery fiction? And I did. I was very fond of, say, Simenon's series about Maigret. I liked that very much. And he said, you should write in those genres. First of all, it's an easy way to get published, or at least, if not an easy way, it's a possible way. It's very difficult for people to get published.
Yes, we've heard that over and over again. And
Yeah.
was that your experience too, that it was
Oh,
a
yeah,
difficult
yeah,
struggle to get published?
Yeah, it's really difficult. But if you write in one of the, popular genres, it's not such a problem, or at least it's a lesser problem. Also, he felt that there was serious literary work that could be done in the genres.
Oh, yeah.
His intention in writing First Blood, for instance, was to exploit the conventions of the genre. And he said, anyone who's worth anything at all who's writing in these genres does precisely that. They take the conventions and they push them to extremes, or they distort them, or in many ways they widen the genre and help to recreate it, so to speak. And it's sort of your responsibility if you're working in those genres.
Sure. Well, time has gone way too fast. I've got more to ask and more I'd like to talk with you about. I want to remind everybody the name of the book is Hit on the House, and this is a Detective Sergeant Mulheisen mystery, so you may want to look in, if you're interested in this one, as I have been after I read it. You may want to go back and read the previous ones, and we're anxiously awaiting the next one as it comes out. Thanks a lot for being our guest on
Well, it's a
Undercover.
pleasure.
In the short time we have left, let me again make note that National Library Week is coming up this month in April. April 18th through the 24th. The theme this year is Libraries Change Lives, and we'll be doing some special events down at the library. So please keep an eye on the newspaper for information about those. Also want to promote our programs that we do at the library. Book discussion for adults. We meet once a month on third Thursday at 7 o'clock at the library, and we've been reading mostly contemporary novels. Last month, for example, we read and discussed a book by Jane Smiley called Thousand Acres. So if you're interested in that, we do have room for more participants, so please call us. You can talk to me, Dave Pauley, or Christine, or Betty, and we'll get you some more information about book discussion and get you signed up if you're interested. Also want to mention our preschool story time. We think it's absolutely essential that kids be exposed to books very early in their lives, and so we 3 times a week do a preschool story time for kids ages 3 to 5, one morning one afternoon one, and one evening one. We'll be doing those through the month of April, and then we take a little hiatus, and we start programming for kids up again in the summer when we have a special summer reading program for kids of all ages. Again, if you need any information about those programs or anything else that's going on at the library, please call us at 721-2665. That's 721-BOOK. Let me again mention the name of the book, Hit on the House, and our author, our guest this evening, John Jackson. Thanks again.
Thank you.